Hey, good morning everybody. It's Matt here, and I'm here with a second video today. I just did one on Chuck Berry's Rocket album from 1979. I did a little review for Fit to be Tie-Dyed. Well, today I'm kind of doing a little, kind of half a follow-up with one of the other members of the VC and half a tribute to another special Beatles album for me, which, as you can see right here, is the Beatles Second Album, released this month. Back in 1964, was released on April 10th, 1964 in the United States, to be exact. And just to talk about the connection with the VC community, Beatle James Griffiths, he started a thread where he asked everybody to give their one song per each Beatle that kind of encapsulates or the essence of each Beatle, a song in the Beatles catalog. They didn't have to write it, but they had to at least have sung the song that each of the Beatles wrote. So basically, I took songs that came from this album. When I did my little list to James, I sent it to him, but then I thought, well, maybe I should do something on video just to get it out there as to which songs I really felt were important. Well, 3 out of the 4 Beatles received a song from this album, and the 4th Beatle got a song that kind of fits into the songs I picked from this album. So basically what I did is I picked Money for John Lennon in Beatle James's thread there. I picked Money for John Lennon, you know, that raw rocking kind of song, early Beatles style, something they sang in the old days. And then as I was going on with my, okay, who's next, I came up with Paul, another song from this album called Long Tall Sally. And the same reasons, that I felt that it was the foundation of the Beatles. It was the roots for who they became. That early rock and roll pioneer style was what formed the Beatles back in the old club days and in Hamburg and at the Cavern. They played the songs of their rock and roll early pioneer heroes, and that's what made them. That's where they started. That's what laid the foundation to what was to grow into the later songs and albums we all love and cherish so much, like, you know, from the early rock and roll into things on a Hard Day's Night, and then eventually to Help and Rubber Soul, and evolving into Revolver, and then of course Sgt. Pepper, and then their final triumph, Abbey Road. I mean, where did it all start? It started in those clubs in Hamburg and Liverpool and all over. You know, that's where it all started. So that's the songs I picked for them. So I picked Money for John Lennon, which is off this album. I picked Long Tall Sally for Paul. I picked Roll Over Beethoven for George. And for Ringo, even though it's not a song directly from this album, but from that era, was Matchbox, an old Carl Perkins number. So each Beatle received an early rock and roll pioneer type song, and that was what I picked for them. So John, Money; Paul, Long Tall Sally; George, Roll Over Beethoven; and Ringo, Matchbox. I felt it just captured who the Beatles were, their essence, and it was the foundation for what they later became and conquered the world, so to speak. So, and they did. So anyway, 3 of those songs came off this album, obviously: Long Tall Sally, Roll Over Beethoven, and Money. This is a great album, folks, and the reason I wanted to do a little tribute to it on this month that it was released is because this album means a lot to me. This is probably my favorite Capitol Frankenstein or thrown together release, whatever you want to call it. But as you know, I won't go into the whole story of what Capitol did, but you know, they, when the Beatles were releasing Please Please Me, and then With the Beatles, etc., Capitol didn't release their albums in the same sequencing or the same type of covers or order as Parlophone did. They had a whole different plan for what they were going to do with the Beatles releases, and I won't go into that whole story of that. I just want to focus on this album today. But many of their early albums up until Sgt. Pepper were kind of thrown together by the Capitol executives, and sometimes I know Dave Dexter is the one that gets most of the blame and responsibility for that, so to speak, and he did a lot of tinkering with the sound and with echo and with reverb and such, and some people like him for it, and some people despise him for what he did. But no matter how you look at it, When I was a young boy, these were the albums we grew up with. We didn't have With the Beatles or The British Hard Day's Night or Please Please Me. You know, these are the albums we had as young people. This is what we were receiving. This is what we thought the Beatles were releasing. So anyway, this is probably my favorite Capitol release. If I had to pick one, I mean, over Meet the Beatles, over Yesterday and Today, you know, you can go on and on of the different Capitol releases where they tinkered around with the song orders and the covers and that. This is my favorite, folks, right here. I love this album. I love the Beatles' second album. As I said, released April of 1964, April 10th. It's a kind of a short album, not as short as Something New, but it's just under 27 minutes, so it is kind of a shortish album. When it was released in April, this shows you how great Meet the Beatles was. This replaced Meet the Beatles at #1. So that goes to show you the run Meet the Beatles had. But this is the album that came in and replaced it, which is kind of fitting. Meet the Beatles is #1 for all those weeks, and then Capitol releases the second album, boom, #1, replaces Meet the Beatles. Now, it was I won't go into the details of this because you can read it on Wikipedia, wherever you want, but or any Beatle book, so I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of this. But basically, it was assembled from an array of sources, you know, British EPs and a little bit from With the Beatles and whatnot. So it was thrown together by Capitol from many different sources. Dave Dexter did load it with a lot of echo and reverb. He really caked it on here on this. And so it almost sounds live. It almost sounds like a live rockin' Beatles album, you know, just without the screaming. But with that echo and reverb, it really gives it kind of a unique live type sound to it. And let me tell you why I love this album so much, why it's my favorite Capitol album. It's just pure, hard, fast rock and roll. I mean, it's just relentless, folks, from start to finish. There's no ballads on here, and nothing against ballads, and nothing against, you know, all the Beatles had their share over the years of writing tender ballads, but there's none on here, folks. You're not going to find any slow, loving numbers on here. This is rock and roll. This is balls to the wall rock and roll. Probably the most rocking Beatles album I've ever heard. That's just my opinion. From start to finish, it's rock and roll. It's Motown. It's blues type numbers. It's rockabilly. It's just, but all in that Beatles style. This is the Beatles rocking out at their best and sounding great. I love it. Just real quick, I'll go through the track listing, side 1, and you all know and love these songs. So Roll Over Beethoven kicks it off, which is fitting. Just like when the Beatles came to America, their first U.S. concert was at the Washington Coliseum, and the first song to kick off that first concert was George belting out Roll Over Beethoven. So it's kind of fitting that it's the first song on this album here. Roll Over Beethoven, George. Then you have Thank You Girl, great, great song, as you all know. You Really Got a Hold on Me. What a, I don't need to tell you about these songs, folks. You know how wonderful they are. You Really Got a Hold on Me. What a great, beautiful song. Devil in Her Heart. Money, You Can't Do That. Side 2, Long Tall Sally. I Call Your Name. Please, Mr. Postman, I'll Get You. And then we round it out with She Loves You. I mean, how can you top this as far as rock and roll? This is rock and roll at its best. This is awesome. This is fantastic. I love it. I love it. I didn't get this album till a few years later. This one happens to be a Capitol full dimensional stereo version, original pressing. My cover's a little beat up. I have to admit there's some tearing in the seams and whatnot. I'll show you the vinyl. But it says stereo right on it, as you can see. And it's just pretty good condition. The vinyl's not bad. I'm happy. If I ever could find an upgrade, I will, especially with the cover. It's kind of beat up a little bit, like I said, but it's an original pressing on the Rainbow Swirl original stereo. Now, my first one I got was, as a young boy, was this one right here. I still have it, and believe it or not, it's one of the few Beatles albums I got as a young boy that I still have in the shrink wrap, which is kind of amazing considering, you know, how kids can be with their records and music, you know, just playing them and banging on them and everything. But anyway, this is my original stereo copy I got as a young boy. It came in a plain white sleeve, and it's on the Apple label. Okay, I'll show you the back here. And again, Apple, so it's got to be, what, late 60s or 1970 or so I got this. And I got it from my dad. He worked in the greater Boston area, or Boston, I should say, and I don't know if any of you remember Jordan Marsh, but it still has a little Jordan Marsh sticker on it. Jordan Marsh was to the Northeast in the Boston area as Macy's is to the New York City area. So those of you from New York City, you'll understand where I'm coming from. Macy's was the big department store you went to if you were from the New York area, but if you were from the greater Boston area, you went to Jordan Marsh. That was the big department store back then. And they had a great record selection, record department from what I understand. And so I still have the sticker. This is one of the few albums I have left from the early 70s or late 60s that my dad got for me at Jordan Marsh. So I have to give my dad credit, and I told you about both my parents, giving them credit for in my Meet the Beatles review, but you know, I got to give my dad credit. Every once in a while he'd surprise me. He'd come home from work and he knew how much I loved the Beatles, and he'd bring me a record album, and he'd lay it on my stand, and then I'd get up the next day and I'd see an album like this just standing there waiting for me. So God bless him. I mean, he was a great dad, and is a great dad, I should say. He's still with us. And there you go, Jordan Marsh sticker from when he bought it for me in Boston. So, still in the shrink and on the Apple label. And the last one I wanted to show you was my mono original. Okay, so you saw my stereo one, which is kind of beat up original. You saw the one my dad got me on the Apple label, still in the shrink, my original as a young boy. This one I got years later. It's an original mono with the original capital inner sleeve, mono pressing. There's the back. I'll show you the vinyl again in the original capital blue sleeve. It's in really great shape, other than a little bit of dust on it. This thing doesn't look like it's been played that often. The label is beautiful. You know, it shines, it has that gloss to it. But wow, you know, I can't remember where I got this one, folks, but really nice copy of it. Okay, now the album, it didn't, again, I spoke about this a little bit in my Meet the Beatles CD video, which was my first ever video. The album did not come out on CD until 2004. It was part of the Capitol Album Set Volume 1. All right, you could only get it in that package, and I think I can show you the package here too. Here it is. So here's the Capitol Albums Volume 1. And again, there's like a little inner sleeve thing where all the CDs are in. I'll just show you the back. You can see the Beatles Second Album's right there. Okay. But that's the package that this album, the CD, came in. 2004, it was the only way to get the Beatles Second Album on a CD. And it was only part of that box. Now you can see it's kind of small, little cardboard sleeve. It's kind of has a tannish, yellowy tinge to it. It's the way it was printed, I guess. And the CD's on a little Capitol rainbow swirl. As you can see, there's the CD. But I want to compare it with you, because then you can only get this as part of the package. If you wanted to get it individually on an official release, you had to wait 10 years to get it in 2014 on this CD right here. This was an individual release in 2014. I believe you can still get it if you search for it out there in the stores, or you can send away for it. But it was also part of a box set called the US Albums box set in 2014. And notice the difference in size, folks, of the packaging. This is like a real pure white color and larger in size. And the one that came out in 2004 as part of the Capitol Albums Volume 1 is much smaller. Well, I shouldn't say much, but it's a little bit smaller. It's a good half-inch almost smaller, top to bottom. And side to side, you can see it's a different packaging here. I'll show you the back of each one. Okay. So you had to wait 10 years till 2014 to get it in this format, individually, to buy it by itself, or you get part of the US Albums box set. And again, as I said in my Meet the Beatles review, If I'm going to listen to this on CD, folks, I'm going to this one. All right, the one that came out in 2004 is part of the Capitol Albums Volume 1. This has the original Dave Dexterized, whatever you want to call it, sound. This has the echo, it has the reverb. It's the way I heard it as a young boy. It's the sound that I know and love, that live feel to it, pure, hard, fast rock and roll. This is the way I want to get it, okay? That's the way we heard it as in our youth. And if you want to hear the sound of this, you've got to get this, the 2004 CD on the Capitol Albums box set, Volume 1. Because this one, the one that came out in 2014, from what I understand, they just took the 2009 remasters from the British releases and slapped the mono and stereo versions together to create this. So this, to me, doesn't have the same sound as this. I like this one much better, okay? So anyway, I think that's pretty much it. Again, I love this album. Great, great rock and roll. We're here on the 53rd anniversary of its release, coming up in a few days. So I just thought I'd share my thoughts on it. And it brings back a lot of memories for me, receiving albums like this from my dad and listening to that early rock and Beatles music as a young boy. It just, it doesn't get any better than that, folks. And whenever I hear this album or slap it on and I play this often, it brings me back to those times. It brings back wonderful memories and makes you smile. And I'm sure this album makes all of you smile. If you're a fan of good rock and roll, and especially the Beatles, you gotta love this album. It's fantastic. So I just want to say thank you. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks to Beatle James, James Griffiths, who kind of inspired this video because I picked John, Money. I picked Paul, Long Tall Sally. George, Roll Over Beethoven, all from this album. And then Ringo, I picked Matchbox. So thanks again, folks. God bless. Have a great week. And I hope to see you again real soon. Thank you for everything. Thanks for subscribing to all the new subscribers. Thanks for your nice comments. And to all my friends out there in the VC, peace. Love you. Bye-bye.